Hey everybody, and welcome to part 2 of the tuning and upgrade basic tutorial. One thing I didn't mention in part 1, and part 1 is linked up there at the top if you need to check it out, is really the basic, easiest, quickest way to upgrade your car and tune it and whatnot is to download somebody else's tune and just install it. No shame in that at all. One thing I don't recommend though is just grabbing a stock car and trying to race with it. And of course you can, it'll just be a lot harder. So at the very least, just grab somebody else's tune, download it, install it, and go from there. Okay, let's go ahead and get going with this tutorial if you want to learn a little bit more about tuning. Alright, let's get into the tuning console. And first up is tires, and what I do is I let the air out. So front, I usually go between 20 and 23. Kind of just depends on if it's, street or dirt. Either way, it doesn't matter too much. And then for the rear, I add a couple points, or I guess a couple pounds per square inch above what I have the front tire pressure set at. So this one I have at 21, so I'm going to put the rear at 23. And the reason I do that is just when you let the air out a little bit, you get more grip. You get more oversteer, and in this game, oversteer is king. So let's go ahead and move on to gearing. Now for gearing, I don't typically mess around with the individual gears, especially since this is just, a quick basic tutorial. I won't go into those at all. We'll just mess around with final drive. Now final drive, you'll see down there in the bottom right-hand corner is a graph. This one's already set pretty well, actually, but a lot of the cars will have that final gear either going off the chart graph a little bit, or being like way over here, not nearly in that corner. So what you want to do, if it's not in that corner, and again, this is just kind of a rough way to do this, a quick way that works pretty well, is move that last gear into the corner, like that. Let me highlight it there. There, that red one, that last one you can see is there in the corner. And that should work for you if you're just doing a quick tune. Okay, let's move on to alignment. Now, I didn't take the option to unlock the alignment. However, if I did, I'll go over some quick tips here. For front camber, I generally put that at negative 0.2, 0.3, somewhere around there. And for rear, I usually set that somewhere about negative 0.7 to 0.9. Those small changes aren't going to be earth-shattering or anything, but that's generally where I stick those two. Toe, don't mess with it unless you want to really get into tuning, but again, this is just a basic guide. And front caster angle, I generally set at 6.5. So that's it for alignment. Let's move on to anti-roll bars. Okay, anti-roll bars, to me, I think is the most important setting you can have. I'm sure that's very arguable, and a lot of people may disagree. But for me, I get the most, control over the steering of the car when I mess around with this. And this setting, I don't even remotely, set at what you would do in a real-world situation. But again, this is a video game. So what I do, I make the front incredibly soft, usually between 10 and 15, kind of depending what's going on. And the rear, I make really stiff, usually around, 45 to 55. We'll put this one up at 55. Okay. Again, this usually gives me the most steering control, and this is the one I play around the most with when I need more oversteer. Okay, let's go on to springs. Alright, springs. Springs can be the most complex setting of the entire tune setup, if you want it to be. There's a math formula involved. For that reason, I'll do this in two parts. Part one will just be a basic explanation. You can skip the math part, and part two will be the math part. And one other thing you'll notice is you'll see at the top there, my car magically became an S2 902, and that is because I added the race springs. I did that so I can, adjust these settings. Now, for the basic explanation, softer is better. So if you don't want to do any math, just soften your front and then soften the rear, but not quite as much. There you go. That's it. And that should do you just fine. Now, if you do want the math piece of it, there's a couple things we need to do. And one of the things is we need to find out the weight of our car. So let me go ahead and do that, and I'll be right back. Alright, I was going to skip this part, but I figured it might be beneficial to show you where to find the weight if you don't know. You go back into upgrades, you can pick any of these, doesn't matter. And just pick again any one you want. And switch the specs there to where it shows, power, torque, weight, that kind of thing. And you'll see there the front is 55%, which means that your rear is 45%. So jot those two numbers down or memorize them, whichever one you feel like doing, and then go back into tuning. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, back in Springs Tune Setup. Now that we know our front and our rear weights, we can get going here with the math. I'm sure that's really exciting for you all. The basic formula, and mine's pretty much based off of this too, is you take the max, which is 1638, and you subtract the minimum, which you see there is 327.6, and I am typing this in my phone calculator. You take that resulting number and you multiply it by the front weight. So that's why you needed the weight. So times 0.55. Now, you take that number and you add back in half of the minimum. So that's where my little formula veers. So let's go ahead and add 1/2 of 327.6. Okay, that gives me a number on my calculator here of 884.52. And I take it up one more notch because I like to sound smart. That's not true. But anyway, I multiply that number, if it's a street I'm tuning for, by 0.7, and if it's dirt, by 0.5. Since this is a street tune, I'll multiply it by 0.7. And that finally gives me my low, or my front number here, which is 619.2. There's no 0.2, 0.1 is the closest thing to it, so that's what I would set that to. Okay, onto the rear, which is essentially the same. A couple small differences. So let's go ahead and take the max here, and we will subtract the minimum, which was the 327.6. And you want to multiply the rear weight, not the front. Pretty straightforward there, which was 45%, so 0.45. And then you want to add in half of the minimum back, 327.6 times 0.5. And that's where I use, that result is what I put my rear spring setting at. I don't multiply that by any other number. So my calculator is telling me it's 917.8. Let's get up there. And interestingly, this is actually stiffer than the default setting. It's usually softer, but what did I say? 0.8, 0.6 is the closest they have. Okay, so that, in a nutshell, is the more complicated way to set your front and rear springs using the formula and whatnot. Hopefully that was enlightening for you. So let's move on to ride height. Now for ride height, the rear, I always set to the lowest setting. And I set the front usually 1/10 of an inch above the rear. Just seeing what a lot of people do, they do set their rear to the minimum and they set the front 1 click higher. But for me, I like to actually do 1/10 of an inch higher. So there we go. Finally, we are done with springs and we can actually move on to damping. Now damping, and I'm sure you're all just thrilled to know, also uses a formula. Now it is the same formula, and it's the basic formula, nothing added on to it. But let's go ahead and do the basic explanation first, and then we'll get on to the math piece. So the basic explanation here is softer is better, kind of the common theme here. And front rebound, I soften a little bit. And rear rebound, since the rear is lighter than the front, you want to soften it a little bit more. And then when you go into bump, you want to not quite be as stiff as the front rebound number. So it's 9.1, just kind of go up a little bit, maybe roughly, very roughly 2/3 of that number. And same with the rear bump stiffness, maybe right about there. It's 7.7, maybe 2/3, very roughly, again, is about 5.8. So that is the basic explanation of damping when you're just winging it. I do not like winging it on damping because it just feels like I'm just totally guessing. So let's go ahead and move into the math. And again, this is the same basic formula as we used in springs. Let's go ahead and get going on the math piece of this. Okay, I had to bring my calculator back up on my phone. So let's reset where this was before we start a calculation here. I think it's about where it was all. Okay, so let's do this. Math, woohoo! For the front, again, it's the same. You take the front max, which is 20, minus the minimum, which is 3. So that is 17. Multiply that by the front weight, which was 0.55. And you add in half of the minimum. So you add in 1.5. And you get 10.85, 10.9. Okay, then you use that number to calculate the front bump. And what I do, for street, I multiply by 0.7. And for dirt, I multiply by 0.5, being a street tune. Again, multiply 10.9 times 0.7. And we get 7.6. Let's get to the rear rebound. And again, same thing. Max minus minimum, which is 17. Multiply by the rear rate, 0.45. Adding in half of the minimum gives you 9.2. And same thing here. Multiply that by 0.7 for the street tune, 6.4. Okay. And there you have the math way to calculate the damping tune score. All right, let's go ahead and move on to aero. And the next three are far simpler, by the way. I did not take the front option to make it adjustable. But if I did, I'd set both of these, front and rear, to speed. And you're good there. Like I said, that was a lot easier. Brake 2 is very simple. For the balance, I move it towards the front by a whopping 3%. That probably really doesn't do anything, but I do it anyway. And this does do a lot. I move the pressure to 140. That is a pretty hard brake whenever you're driving around. I do like that better. A lot of people don't. They keep it at 100. But, some people do move it around, and that's just the way I do like to put my brake setting at. Okay, let's move on to diff. This one, again, not too hard. For dirt, I move it down to about 45, roughly keep it around there for the front. Being a street, as you put it, about 55. Deceleration, I keep at 0. Moving on to the rear here. Acceleration, if this was dirt, I just add 10. So if I set it to 45, I'd put it at 55. For street, though, I have it at 55, so we'll put this at 65%. Deceleration, most people put 0. I put a token 15. Again, for whatever reason, just seems to work for me. It's what I've just always done. And balance, I do like to move into the 70s, usually between 70 and 75. You could crank it way up here, but you're basically turning your car into a rear wheel drive, which defeats the purpose of putting all-wheel drive into your drivetrain there. But I do like to make it give some good old power to the rear there. So I put it, I don't know, like I said, between 70 and 75. We'll set this one at 73. Okay, that does it for the tuning setup. Overall basic tuning. I did get into some detail there, I know, on the springs and the damping with the math. But again, you can skip all that up. Let's go ahead and do these settings and accept them. And that's really it. You got your upgrades done, you got your tunes done, and you're good to go. And like I said before, there's two schools of thought. The tuning like you would if it was a real car in real world, or tuning it like it's a video game. And like I said, I choose the video game because that's pretty much what it is there. And because it is a video game, though, there's a lot of personal preference, a lot of different little tweaks and hacks that you can do. If you look up 10 different videos on how to tune, you're going to find, 10 different opinions on how to do it. And you can also get into even more detail. You can use that telemetry screen. For example, here on alignment, you can see camber right there. And if you're turning around corners, you can use that to align your car. That's a whole nother video in of it itself. But hopefully you guys are learning something. You can use my tune as a base and just tweak the way you want to tweak it. Mess around and see if you can find a tunes that you'd like to do. All right, thanks everybody. See ya.
Right now! Slaughter the subscribe button, castrate the like button, or don't, and be a weakling.